a piece of research. Really, it was my first really independent piece of research, and I was pretty proud of it. I felt like it was a good piece of work. I'll tell you more about the research itself later. But in the room that day, there was a group of very, very senior professors from all over the world, people who are maybe the most influential or the most important people in my area, and they were watching the presentation. And at the end of the presentation, probably the most famous guy in my whole academic field was just bursting to ask a question. He was like jumping out of his chair, me. And so I said, okay, go ahead, ask your question. And he said, now that you've got your results, do you think it was worth all the time that you spent doing this research? So for me, this was like not a nice question to get, because it felt like he was asking, well, it felt like he was saying, I don't think it was worth all of this time that you spent. I feel like you wasted your time. So as a young researcher, it felt a little bit uncomfortable to be asked this question by somebody with so much experience, somebody that I respected so much. Now, I don't really remember what I said to him. I kind of mumbled a lot. And I don't remember giving a very good answer to that question. But I guess I wanted to talk about how I would answer that question now, given the additional research that I've done and what I know now, having finished my PhD, about how we justify the research we do, and the decisions that we make in order to make sure we're doing good research. Let me talk about the field that I work in, which is linguistics. So I'm a linguist, basically. That means that I study languages. There is a kind of myth which describes the beginning of the field of linguistics. It's known as Plato's problem. You guys might know about the Greek philosopher Plato. The story goes that Plato was watching the sunset, and it was a really, really beautiful sunset. And he said to himself, wow, that is a really beautiful sunset. And then because he's Plato, because he's a philosopher and he thinks a lot, he then started thinking, how did I manage to say such a suitable thing? There was a beautiful sunset in front of me, and then I said, wow, what a beautiful sunset. That was just the right thing to say at just the right moment. How did I do it? It seems like a kind of obvious thing to ask, but a part of this is like, how did I find the right words to express my feelings so quickly? How did I get the grammar right? I didn't make a grammatical mistake. The words were all in the right place. How did I manage to say this in a way which is socially acceptable? So from this simple question, we got the field, the entire field of linguistics. So let me just, oh, hey, should I call you Whit or should I call you Mr. Altizer?
I'm called Mr. Whit here.
Mr. Whit, okay, all right, you've gone with the sort of hybrid,
yeah,
hybrid model. Okay, could I share my screen?
Absolutely. Oh yeah. Sorry,
I don't have anything particularly compelling to show you, but it's just.
You should have access now.
Okay, cool. Thank you. There we go. yeah, just a small illustration. So what you find is that in a lot of different fields of academic study, there's some kind of foundational question, like Plato's problem. How do we say the right thing at the right time? And that question leads to many other questions. So in linguistics, when people try to answer the question, how do we say the right thing at the right time, they have to break it up into different questions in order to make it answerable. So some of the questions are about how do we get the grammar right all the time? And some questions are about how do we choose the right vocabulary, for example. And so these questions then become the foundational question for like, oh, I've forgotten the word, like subfields. So in linguistics, there are many, there is the field of linguistics, and then there are many subfields, things like applied linguistics or sociolinguistics or cognitive linguistics, a lot of different fields that all try to answer this main question in slightly different ways. And from those sub-questions, we get specific research questions. Actually, the real diagram should look a bit more like that, because there are so many different sub-questions, and then so many different people asking so many different specific research questions. So I guess what I wanted to say, the main thing I wanted to say to you guys was that we should try to remember when we're forming our research questions, we should remember where our questions come from ultimately. It's one of the problems that I think that I had as a junior researcher, and I mean, I'm still a junior researcher. I finished my PhD, but most people consider the first 5 years of independent research after your PhD to still really be a very junior period where you're making a lot of mistakes. One of the mistakes that people make is that they get so wrapped up in these questions down here, these specific research questions, that they forget to connect their research back up here and up here. So, as you're doing lots and lots of reading, you tend to be reading about this stuff, the stuff at the bottom level. And you need to do that. You need to do that reading. It's essential. It's important. But we get so curious and so interested in these specific research questions that we forget that really what our goal is to answer, at least in a small way, to answer this big question, this main question. You can find foundational questions like this in every single field of academic study. So even if you're talking about something like biology, like a founding question for the field of biology would be something like what forms of life exist, or something like that, or how does life happen? Something very, very general like that. So I think that basically the answer to the question that I was asked, was it, you remember the story I told you that, about being asked if it was worth doing the research that I did. I would now be able to say, well, yes, it was, because my research contributed to this foundational question in linguistics. That's how I would justify the work that I do. But in order to be able to do that, we've got to keep that in our mind all the time. We've got to keep in our mind the relationship between what we're doing today and what linguists have been doing for hundreds of years. So when you're reading about specific research, down at the bottom level here, as a reader, you need to be asking yourself, how did this person, how did this researcher answer these bigger questions? The researcher will always tell you their specific research questions, the bottom level stuff, but they don't always tell you this stuff in the middle level or this stuff at the top. They don't tell you how their work relates to that kind of thing. That doesn't happen very often. So the reader has to figure it out for themselves. So I guess I'm saying that that's something that we all need to do as researchers. We need to keep in mind how the little questions relate to the really big questions. So when we're designing research, we start with our questions, but it's a good thing to be always trying to relate them up to the bigger questions. So using that kind of idea, let me just talk about the research that I've been doing. You guys have had a look at the Small World of Words stuff online. That project is a really massive project, as more than 80,000 people have taken part now and millions of words have been contributed to it. I'll just explain, hold on, I'll come to that in a moment. When you do the word association project, you're given a cue word. So the word that pops up on the screen is called a cue, and then you give a response. So there are two words involved in this, the cue and the response. The cue is given to you, and then you give the response. And that's kind of how word association works. So in my research, basically, sorry. If I actually go back to the previous page, in my research, I'm asking questions about the way that people respond to specific cues in word association. So the research question in the experiment that I just told you about, the experiment that got this awkward question, was something like, what happens when we give transitive versus intransitive cues to people in a word association study? So a transitive cue would be rescue. So this is a verb, and I guess you guys are not familiar really with the terms transitive and intransitive. So let me explain about that. A transitive verb is a verb which has an object. So in verb grammar, we've generally got two pieces. We've got the subject and we've got the object. So the subject is usually the thing that does the verb, and the object is usually the thing that the verb is done to, or the thing that is affected by the verb. So in a transitive sentence, we've got a subject, a verb, and an object. But intransitive verbs are verbs that don't need an object. They have a subject, but they don't need an object. So here we've got the birds and the birds migrated. We don't need anything after migrated. It would be kind of crazy to say the birds migrated John. That's nonsense. In fact, it's pretty much nonsense to put almost any noun here. We can't say the birds migrated Korea, for example. We can say migrated to Korea, but that's not a subject anymore because the word to changes the grammar. It isn't a subject noun, sorry, an object noun. So intransitive verbs don't have objects. So my question was, when we do word association, will people give different responses to intransitive cues, like migrate, to the responses they give to transitive verbs, such as rescue? This probably seems like a really kind of abstract thing to research. Actually, I don't blame that researcher, that important guy, for asking the question that he asked, because I think it's really easy to look at this research question and say, well, why does anyone really need to know that? Like, is that really important? So probably you guys are thinking the same thing. So the way that we justify this question is, as I said, by trying to work backwards from my kind of very small seeming, very unimportant seeming research question back to these more foundational questions that nobody doubts the importance of. So let me do that. Let me go through that process for you. I can't really explain that without explaining the results of my study. So what happened when I did this study was I gave people 50 intransitive verbs and 50 transitive verbs. They did a word association test on a piece of paper, and they just wrote down the first thing that came into their mind for each verb. I didn't tell them that some of the verbs were transitive and some of the verbs were intransitive. I did tell them that they were all verbs. And so everybody just wrote down the first thing that came to their head. I think there were maybe 50 something people who did the experiment. It took them about 15 minutes. And then I categorized these responses in lots of different ways. So the main categories were, I was looking at words that had similar meaning to the cue. So for migrate, that might be move, or for rescue, that might be save. And then I was looking for words that come before that cue word in a sentence. So for migrate, that might be people, or it might be birds. And for rescue, it might be, as we've already got, it might be firefighter, or it might be the police rescue people. And then I looked for words that could come after that word in a sentence. Let me just clarify this a little bit. So, okay. So then, words that come after the cue, well, for intransitive verbs, it's not obvious what those would be. There could be words like south. Sorry, let me clarify what I'm doing here. Or they could be words like yearly. But it's not obvious what would be after the cue there, because there's no grammatical object, like I said. And then for the transitive verbs, this would be the object that would come after the cue. So it might be children, like we've got in the example, or it might be, I don't know, just a general word like somebody. Okay. So what I was doing really was just counting how many responses of each type were given by my 50 participants to these 50 words. And I wanted to see if there was a difference in the numbers. And actually what I found was that for these meaningfully related words, words that had a similar meaning to the cue, intransitive and transitive verbs gave the same number, basically the same number of that kind of response. But for the before the cue, the intransitive verbs gave more of this type of response. So we had intransitive was greater than transitive for that one. And then for this one, we had intransitive was less than transitive. For the transitive verbs, what we had was almost nobody, this was the surprising part of the study, almost nobody ever gave a response to a transitive verb which was a word that came before the cue. Pretty much every response, which was, you know, a word that comes either before or after the cue, was in that category. So we can almost, you know, we can almost kind of delete this. This just didn't happen for the transitive cues. People much prefer to give responses which are words that come after the cue in a sentence. That's kind of weird because transitive verbs have both, right? You have both options. You can give the subject or you can give the object. But they didn't, the respondents didn't like giving the subject. They only wanted to give the object. I don't really know why that is, but it sort of suggests that when people store words in their mind, they store transitive words together with the object, the usual object of that cue. But when we store intransitive words in our mind, we store the intransitive verb together with the subject. So the relationship in our mind for an intransitive verb is with the subject, but the relationship in our mind for the transitive verb is with the object. I hope that's not too complex. Are you guys okay? Are you kind of following along? Yeah. Okay, people are nodding. All right, great. All right, so yeah, I was pretty happy when I found this out. This was something new. Nobody had ever found this out before. In fact, some people had done smaller studies than mine and tried to find the difference between transitive and intransitive verbs, but they got different results to mine. And that was great for me because I was able to say, well, these guys, their old study only used 6 verbs, and that's not enough. They didn't use enough verbs to identify the true pattern, but I did. Fantastic, you know. This felt really nice. But then obviously I got asked this question about the research, which made me feel less nice. So the way that I would explain this research now, if I was asked that question again, if you go back to the previous slide, my question was, do people respond differently in word association to transitive and intransitive verbs? The question that comes before that, the kind of sub-foundational question, is something like, how do people use words so fluently? And this is a question which kind of founded the field of psycholinguistics. So the research I'm describing is psycholinguistic research. It's about how language is stored and organized in our mind. And the real question we're trying to answer is, how is it possible that we can find words so quickly? Okay. Yes. Okay. How is it possible that we can find words so quickly? So when we're speaking, we speak really, really fast. We don't really need to stop and think about the words that we want to use. We just say them. They come to our mind super, super quick. How is that possible? And so what my research is saying is that we store words in our mind together with the words that we're likely to use with that word. So with an intransitive verb, we store that word together with the subject that we might use together with the verb. So when we want to talk about migration, our mind is kind of preloading all of the words about migration that might be the subject of that sentence. And when we are using transitive verbs, our mind loads up all of the information about possible objects of a transitive verb. And that enables us to find words quickly and fluently. So how does that relate back to the foundational question, how can we say the right thing at the right time? Well, this is one answer. It's one small answer to that question. Our minds are kind of loaded up with, oh, where did that go? What just happened? Our minds are kind of preloaded with the words that we might need to say next, or to say together with another word that we're planning to say. So that gives us the ability to find the right words at the right time. So to sum up, I guess, I haven't talked much about the research that I do, but what I'm trying to say, I guess, is that in order to be confident about the research that we're doing, we always need to keep in mind these the questions that were important in the beginnings of our research field, and also the questions that were important in the beginning of our subfield. So this question, as I said, that's the question that really drives the field of psycholinguistics. So it's identifying good research questions or justifying your research questions is a process of becoming aware of what are the bigger questions that people are trying to answer in this field of study, and how did other people try to answer those questions, and how am I trying to answer those questions. If we can't relate our research questions back to these bigger questions, then we've probably become a little bit too obsessed with a very narrow field of study that isn't really a field of study itself, but was somebody else's attempt to answer a bigger question. So just keep your eyes, I guess, on the big things, the big questions, and you won't go too far wrong, I guess.
Dr. Thwaites, thank you so much. That's like perfect lesson for us at the stage that we're in right now. So
Great.
Thank you. I was going to ask you if I could follow up with you and maybe do just a video. We could maybe do a video answering questions that the students have, because we have second period.
Sorry, yeah, I hadn't realized I talked a bit too much.
No, it was great. It's perfect. It covered everything and where we're at.
Okay.
But I'd also love to check in with you later in the semester. We hopefully will be back face to face and we'll have a little bit more time in the classroom.
Okay.
But I found that very helpful. So thank you. Yeah, let me chat. Can I chat with you for a little bit and I'll let the students go?
Sure. Yeah.
Everyone, tomorrow we'll discuss the sample paper. I'm going to gather some questions from you for Dr. Thwaites. So be thinking about what you want to ask. And move on to your next class. See y'all.
Bye-bye.
Some people here that want to say hello.
Vin. Hey, Poppy. How you doing? Oh, let me get Abby in here. Abby.
Peter, that was perfect. Absolutely perfect.
Oh, brilliant.
Sorry that I had to give you a 5-minute warning.
Oh, no worries. Yeah. Sorry, it overran so much. In my head that was 15 minutes, but
it was really good. I think that's something that they hadn't been thinking about really.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. It takes a while to get to that point.
Yeah. They're sort of, they want to rush into something, and I'm trying to reel them back in a little bit.
Right. Yeah.
Oh, is that Dora Woofington?
Yes.
This is Dora Woofington, internet celebrity.
Yes.
How are you kids doing?